I'll just give us a talk on Dr. Ambedkar and his radical views, and then we'll have a discussion. We'll go into discussion groups, and I'll give you a very simple question to kind of explore at the end of my presentation. And yeah, let's see what emerges out of that for you. And then we'll have a tea break. We're not going to have a plenary this time, I think, because we probably won't have time. Because knowing me, I'll probably go on and on a bit. It often happens when I get enthusiastic about something, I can go on a little bit. If I go on too long, Yashodhara will give me this wave like this. And if I go on too long, he can pull the handle and then I just sort of disappear into the, yeah, so it's the fifth in the series on views. And then in the second half, after the tea break, we'll have Yashodhara lead us in the practice of metta bhavana, so which I presume you've all done. Okay, so how to approach this big topic of Dr. Ambedkar and his radical Buddhist views. Okay. So here we go. If you'd like to get yourself comfortable. Oh, by the way, I haven't said welcome to our online friends. Hello, everybody, and glad to have you with us online. That's so nice that you're here. Okay, so in the blurb on the website, this is what it said. This is what a short little introduction on the blurb to my talk. It said, Dr. Ambedkar was a great uniting Buddhist figure of 20th century India. His work greatly influenced the future of modern India and embodied the deepest Buddhist teachings of compassion, human rights, and equality. Tonight, Saddharaja will introduce us to his radical Buddhist views and how these influenced and uplifted the lives of millions. Okay, so that's it really. That's really what the talk's all about, how he uplifted the lives of millions of people. So let's just break down a couple of those lines a little bit. He was a great uniting figure of the 20th century, and he certainly was in India, because millions and millions of women and men have entered Buddhism as a result of his teaching and his example. And that still carries on today in India today. But also, just as importantly in a way, he was also the architect of the Indian constitution. So that's the largest democracy in the world, because he was a cabinet minister, he was a statesman, and he actually wrote the Indian constitution, which is the world's longest written constitution. But I'll say a bit more about that later. So he had a massive effect on the whole of India through that constitution, as well as obviously his Buddhist writings and teachings and example. He also did a lot of work for the emancipation of women. Women in India traditionally had a really, really rough role up until he came along. There's still a bit of that going on. It could be improved, but he made a massive difference to equal rights for women in India. And well, as I say, he developed the Indian constitution. He worked amongst Dalits, which is the lowest in the Hindu caste system, or it's outside of the caste system even. He was a statesman, he was an author, he was a barrister. He did all this work for bringing education through to everyone in India where it didn't exist. Modern industrial India, as it is today, couldn't exist. If you're using a piece of software on your computer or smartphone, it's probably written in India. And that directly goes back to Dr. Ambedkar. He set the scene for the kind of India that you've got today. So all the political parties adopt him now, which is a bit ironic, considering how some of them are. But he's largely unknown outside of India. You would, unless you've been in Buddhist circles, you wouldn't have heard of him. Probably, I certainly didn't. Before 1986, I'd never heard of him. And the reason for this is to do with political British, particularly British political history. But I'll say a little bit more about that later. Another thing I said was he embodied the deepest teachings of compassion, human rights, and equality. So yeah, he was a great Buddhist exemplar, actually. He was, the way that he was, actually had a really big effect on people, millions and millions, and still are doing today. So he's often referred to in Buddhist circles as a bodhisattva, one of these people that exhibit enlightenment qualities that are very far down the path of enlightenment. And yet in his demeanor, he was a very unassuming and quite humble man to actually know him and to meet him. He was very unselfish and tireless in his work for other people. Right up to the night of his death, he was working for other people. A remarkable man, really. So he was deeply concerned for other people and the well-being of others in the world, not just India. He's personally had a very big effect on my life, because 20 years ago I started working in India for the Buddhist movement in India, and first went out there, and I didn't really know who Dr. Ambedkar was very deeply, but I soon got to know, because he was everywhere in the Buddhist world. This figure, this sort of man with glasses and a suit, seemed to be everywhere that I looked. On every shrine, every Buddhist center, every vihar, he was there, every retreat center. And I realized I didn't know enough about him. But as soon as I started to see the effect of his work, it became a very big part of my own life. And that continues to grow, that inspiration continues to grow. So usually at the start of Dr. Ambedkar talks, there's a life story, but I'm not going to do that tonight. I'll let you look him up on Wikipedia. Have a quick look on Wikipedia. You'll be amazed by what you read about him. But as my presentation continues, quite a bit about his life will come out just sort of naturally, because it was a remarkable 65-year life. He was born into the lowest kind of strata of Indian society. He was what's called a Dalit. In those days, it was called untouchable. And he didn't really have any human rights that we would easily recognize. It was very, very hard for him to get an education. But he rose to become the most qualified man in India. I'll repeat that. He was the most qualified man in India. I mean, what a remarkable thing, which is why he ended up, the Prime Minister of India asked him to write the Constitution. What an incredible guy. A social reformer, political leader, anthropologist, barrister, economist, writer, speaker, a founder of schools and universities all over India. One of the most common things you'll see outside universities is the name of Dr. Ambedkar. So he's a remarkable man in that regard. But yeah, he started off at the very sort of lowest level, but through a series of lucky breaks, very, very hard work and talent, he became this kind of person. Anyway, as I say, I'm not going to go into all that tonight. But as I say, you're probably unlikely to have ever heard of him. And there are, particular reasons for that, connected, I'm sorry to say, with Britain and the British Empire. It's not all just to do with the religion of Hinduism. It's also to do with British history and all that. And I can't really go into all that right now. So in 2012 on Indian television, there was once a nationwide program organized on who is the greatest Indian. And this was on History TV 18 channel, apparently, which I've never seen. Anyway, 20 million people voted, and hundreds of millions of people watched it. And Dr. Ambedkar was named as the greatest Indian, which is really, really interesting. So it's starting to kind of, within India, he's starting to be very widely appreciated. So I'd say he ranks alongside great world leaders. I think he's one of the most incredible people that ever existed in the 20th century. So yeah, I think he kind of ranks a bit alongside some of the great people that we would have heard of, like Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Malala Yousafzai, Dalai Lama, and Nelson Mandela. You know, we all know these people and who they are, and whatever you think of them, they're great individuals. They're Nobel Peace Prize winners, and deservedly so. I think Dr. Ambedkar's definitely up there with those kind of people. The difference is they're all a lot more well-known than he is. So what were his views? Oh, by the way, yeah, our own founder in Sri Ratna, Bhante Sangharakshita, he actually knew Dr. Ambedkar and he was a friend of his. And he was influenced by Dr. Ambedkar greatly. And our own Buddhist movement in India, which is much, much larger than it is here in Europe, is profoundly inspired and influenced by Dr. Ambedkar. So, what were his views and why were they so radical? So we're looking at views and Buddhist views in this series. So what were his views? Well, he wrote so much and he campaigned so much in his life that it's actually very, very hard to actually nail down all the different views he had on such a wide range of topics, as he was so learned. However, I have examined a great deal of them, and I think it comes down to four things. I think there's four views, and they're all quite radical, and I'm going to say something about them, because I think these views actually show you the value of what can happen when you have a skillful Buddhist view, and the effect that that can have on society, people around you, and other people. So it kind of exemplifies the value of a skillful view. So in our own lives, we influence other people, not on the scale of these people, but we have an effect on the people around us. So how we are, how we practice, our example has an effect. So there's lots to learn. So let's have a look at view number one. The first essential view, well, his essential view of the world was a Buddhist one. He was a Buddhist, and the Buddha was his main inspiration. He had three gurus he talked about that profoundly influenced him. One was a 15th century poet, radical poet called Kabir, an Indian poet who was very kind of direct and spoke the truth. Another was a great Victorian social reformer called Mahatma Phule, who again was another person who cared about women's rights. He was profoundly influenced by him, but he was particularly influenced by the Buddha, who he called his master. And he deeply read the life of the Buddha and his story, and that really set him on a course in his life to seeing things from a Buddhist point of view. So he accepted the essential teaching that we have in Buddhism of dependent origination or conditionality. You know, the teaching which says everything arises in dependence upon conditions, and everything ceases independent upon conditions. And that includes our ethical life, the teaching of karma, and also the teaching of the Dharma Night, that we can act in a way which brings about enlightenment. So he accepted all that, and he was a practicing Buddhist. Though he converted right at the end of his life, he'd actually been practicing for a great deal of it beforehand. So there was his formal conversion, but then a lot of his life, this is what he was practicing. There was particularly, so he went for refuge to the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And he was particularly embraced the five precepts, the ethical precepts. And he felt that the five ethical precepts could be practiced by anyone, whether they're a Buddhist or not. It was like good for any society anywhere to practice those precepts. And if we did, it would be a very, very different world. And this was an incredibly radical thing to do for him to embrace Buddhism, because he was born a Hindu. And in India, if you actually leave the religion that you're born in and adopt another religion, that's a very, very big deal. That's a very, very big deal. In our society, it isn't. You know, people do this all the time. But India, and probably even still today, it's a very big deal to do that. And but he was very clear about why he wanted to do that. And because he was such a prominent figure, it had a very big effect on him. So, and he did that at a time when he formally converted, 1956, it's one of the most brutally hierarchical countries in the world. India at that time was brutally hierarchical. So for him to kind of leave that and embrace Buddhism was a really, really big thing. And I'll explain a little bit about that a bit later. So yeah, he formally converted on October the 14th, 1956, which created this thing called the Dharma Revolution, which is a peaceful revolution, which is still going on in India today. So, anything more to say about that? Let me just see what I've written. I always have far more notes than what I think I'll need. But things pop out at me. Yeah, so despite him being an academic, a statesman, a cabinet minister, a barrister, all these things, his essential view of the world was a Buddhist view. That's how he saw things. And as I say, this was deeply radical, particularly as he was born into Hinduism with its four castes, with the aristocrats, the warriors, the merchants, and the menials. And Dr. Ambedkar was actually born outside of that caste system. He was what's called an outcast. So he really had no status at all in society. So yeah, he really knew what that felt like. And he was someone who achieved the highest achievements within society. So he saw it all, really, in a direct kind of way. So his formal conversion in 1956 was a really, really radical thing to do. And together with hundreds of thousands of followers, he converted. The first conversion was over 400,000, which is like 4 Wembley stadiums. If you imagine the cup final at Wembley Stadium, or the Olympics 2012, it was like 4 times that. And then there was another one a few days later of a similar size, and then millions more followed shortly after. So living in Europe, people in Europe wouldn't have heard about this kind of thing at the time. But it happened. It really did happen. And it shows how one person can change a whole country through their views. So for myself, in a very, very small way, I've tried to do that kind of thing myself. I've tried to influence people through the Dharma, and which is why I give talks like this and do things. But as I say, in a very, very small way. So let's look at his second view and what that was. So Dr. Ambedkar viewed life in terms of equality. Yeah. Again, this was radical because this brutally hierarchical country that he was living in at the time. But he deeply believed to his core that all people were essentially the same. The differences between us, where we come from, how we look, our skin color, all those sorts of things, not important. That's what we deeply believe. And of course, that's a Buddhist view. And well, we know that, racism and casteism, they're very, very deep things in society. We're only really getting around to properly tackling it here in the West, even now. We've made a lot of progress. But that was his core view, that we're all equal. And let's have a look at what he said about that. The main thing that he was concerned about was human rights, that we're all, wherever we're from, whatever our station in life, there's certain fundamental human rights that we're entitled to as a human being. And he felt that everyone should have those. And a lot of the work that he did at government level was to help bring that kind of thing about. Yeah, so he felt everybody was capable of growing and developing, educationally, spiritually, in a human way, if they had the right conditions. If they had the right conditions, everyone could grow and change. But one of those conditions was education. So it was hot on education for everyone. And that's something we just take for granted. I've got a little granddaughter, she's 4, and she's looking forward to going to school. She's going to preschool at the moment. It's all completely free. And my son and his wife said, oh, which school will she go to? You know, they're all good schools where they live in Cheltenham. And that's something that we've had for a long time. Very easy to take it for granted. But in the India of his day, it was rare for millions, or it was unattainable for millions and millions of people. It's amazing he wasn't assassinated, really, because there were a lot of forces against this at the time. And there were attempts made on his life, but luckily they weren't successful. The Hindu caste system has probably been around for over 1,000 years. And from the early 1700s in India through to 1858, India was effectively ruled by a British trading company called the East India Company. It was ruled from Leadenhall Street, London, from a little office in Leadenhall Street, London, which you can still go and see. And it's an incredible thing, but it's true. And then from 1858 to 1947, it was directly ruled by the British Crown. It's called the British Raj. So 200 years of British rule in India hardened and solidified the caste system. It made it it's called divide and rule. And that's what happened. So it was particularly brutal for the Dalit people at that time. And direct comparisons have been made with the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the East India Company was part of the transatlantic slave trade as well. So it was effectively a form of slavery. When I first started going to India, I felt terribly aware of this because I'm white and British, and somehow I felt kind of responsible for it all. And of course, Indian people are so friendly, but I used to have this guilt all the time whenever I was in it, and I would see old British buildings and this kind of thing, and somehow I of course, it's nothing to do with me, but that's how I felt. So Dr. Ambedkar was an important factor in making India a lot more equal. And he did this in 4 ways. He talks about it in 4 ways. He talks about social equality. So that's, basic human rights, which we take for granted. But also he talked in terms of ethical equality, meaning that regardless of your status in life, how you act is your karma. How you skillfully or unskillfully, you can't avoid that. We're all equal in that regard. So if you act unskillfully, well, that's going to come back on you no matter who you are. If you act skillfully, that has good results for you. So in that regard, we're all quite equal. So that's a Buddhist teaching that he embraced early on. But then he also talked in terms of inner equality. And that's this whole psychological process, social process that goes on with us when we compare ourselves to other people. Say, oh, he's a lot better looking than I am. Or she's got a lot more money than me and she's better dressed. Oh, look at that car, look at that car, look at the house. We're always kind of comparing ourselves favorably or unfavorably. It's very, very deep in our nature. And he was very keen to kind of get rid of that, really, and to leave it. And he saw it as quite an empty thing. He called it the comparison trap. So it's a trap which just creates misery for human beings. Instead of just being happy with who you are and what you're doing, you're always unhappy because you're comparing yourself with others. Very easy thing to get into. And then there was a fourth level of equality, which is very deep teaching, Buddhist teaching, which is to do with letting go of attachment to self. So it's one of the fundamental but profound teachings of Buddhism that we like to fix ourselves in a particular way. You know, I'm a 63-year-old kind of retired artist kind of thing. And that's how I can, that actually the way that we fix ourselves and think about our identity is not something that we should become too attached to. We're really quite different from that. We need to let go of that attachment to ourselves in that regard. This was something that the Buddha taught, and Dr. Ambedkar took it on at quite a deep level. So that's equality. Yeah. He also seems to have, it's hard to know whether he influenced Martin Luther King or Martin Luther King influenced him, but Dr. Ambedkar talked about worth, not birth. He said is what matters with human beings. The kind of person that you become, your character, is what matters, not where you're born. And Martin Luther King said something quite similar. Okay, that's probably enough to say about that. Yeah. I think for us, there's something to reflect on there around equality. We think, oh yeah, equality, yeah, we've got that in the UK. We've got that here. Everything's equal, isn't it? And it isn't, for a start. And also there are these deeper levels that we can reflect on and be working on in our lives and helping to bring about in wider society. So there's another view, the third view, I think, that Dr. Ambedkar, how he saw life was that it was in terms of fraternity. And fraternity is a bit of an old-fashioned word. It's a Victorian word, really. But really it means a collection, a friendly society, a group of people who look after each other, which of course is very close to very much the Sangha. Here in the spiritual community, we've got the Sangha. So it's very easy to say most of us will have some experience of that in our lives. And people are bound together through metta or love. Yeah. And Dr. Ambedkar felt very strongly that this is something that the whole of the world could benefit from. A whole country, a whole society could benefit from all this. And this, again, was a very, very deeply radical view in a world where money and power are so obsessive. People are so obsessed with money and power in this world today, just as much as they were back in his day. And he saw that very clearly. And of course, he was operating within a government. So he saw that, he was part of the process. He saw that very clearly. That money and power is not what actually brings people together and creates a decent world for everybody. He felt that we needed a love revolution, a metta revolution within the world. We needed fraternity. When I first started working in India, all those years ago, I was really struck by the friendliness of ordinary people in India, wherever I went, on trains. I even once went into a trucker's night stop at about 3 o'clock in the morning, because I was going on. And truckers' night stops in India are very, very rough places, I can tell you. And I thought, if I'm ever going to encounter any hostility, well, I was the only white man, I was with some other Indian people, this would be the place. And everyone came over, shook my hand, hello, and so nice to me. And that's what I always get in India. People are very friendly, on the whole, more friendly than we are in the UK, I'd say, on the whole. But people are friendly everywhere, aren't they? And the people who travel the world always say this, that wherever you go in the world, actually, there are friendly people. So Dr. Ambedkar was strongly influenced by the Buddha's example, his loving example. He could see that he could read the scriptures. In the life of the Buddha exuded a lot of metta in his life amongst his disciples and the wider society. He didn't just give that to some people and not to others. He gave it to everyone in a genuine way. So that's another example for us. That's something that we can bring into our own lives? Are we doing that? Are we warm and friendly towards a certain group of people, but the rest I'm not interested in? So Dr. Ambedkar's fraternity included general social friendliness. He was into that without a doubt. But he also said that we need two kinds of fraternity. He said we needed inner fraternity, first of all, and of course we know quite a bit about that. We're practicing metta bhavana, and of course it's quite difficult to do, isn't it, sometimes? And there you are trying to feel some warm feelings towards yourself, and it might not be easily flowing. You've got to kind of generate it and get into that, and then you can kind of extend that out to other people. It's not usually what people do over the evening, is practice metta bhavana, but it's a wonderful thing, and it does have an effect on you, your mental health, your well-being. It has a spiritual effect on the people around you in a profound way. And he was saying this is what we have to do. So Dr. Ambedkar he meditated, and he did the metta bhavana practice. He knew about this, and he was inspired by the example of the Buddha. So he saw that our minds influence our actions. It's a fundamental teaching of the Buddha that everything starts with the mind. How our minds are affects what we do with our bodies and how we act. And if you're putting time in to develop and grow metta within your own mind, that's going to have an effect on how you operate, people that you work with. I used to work in a mental hospital for 3.5 years. I never talked about Buddhism with people, because I don't generally outside of these contexts, but people knew. They said, there's something a bit different. Also, there's on another ward, there's another ward member called Yoga Ratna. And they said, you're like that guy Yoga Ratna, aren't you? That guy over there. Except it's not called Yoga Ratna there. But they'd seen that there was a connection. So they picked something up. So I think it can show in the way that we are. He was also influenced by Kabir, the great poet in this regard. And there's a famous quote from Kabir, which goes something like this: "Love does not grow on trees or is bought in the marketplace. If one wants to be loved, one must first know how to give love." So that affected Dr. Ambedkar's inner fraternity, but also there was his outer fraternity. He talked about that. And he talked about a society working together which looked out for each other, that wasn't just at war all the time. But once again, he believed that the 5 positive precepts were one of the ways that could actually come about in any society. So when you think about it, the 5 positive precepts are a wonderful thing. Loving kindness, open-handed generosity, stillness, simplicity and contentment, truthful communication, mindfulness, clear and radiant. I mean, what's not to like? It's incredible stuff, which can have a very strong effect upon the people around us. So if Dr. Ambedkar were alive today, I believe he'd be concerned about climate change, because that's the big issue of our day, and which is threatening the future of man. He'd be involved in that in some way, I feel sure. So as much as he could, he tried to put fraternity, metta, love into the Indian constitution, the Bharatiya Samvardhana, the longest constitution national constitution in the world. So he put that in there in some of the values of Indian society. So the final view to mention about Dr. Ambedkar was this view, he viewed life in terms of liberty or freedom. It's another word for liberty. Liberty, again, is a bit of an old-fashioned word, isn't it? People think of kind of statue of liberty, and there's nothing wrong with that. So liberty or freedom, so thought in terms of obviously social freedom on that level, being once again something we take completely for granted in the UK here, that we've got freedom, social freedom in that regard. And once again, he talked in terms of spiritual freedom. So I'll come on to that in a second. And he also talked about outer liberty and inner liberty. And this outer liberty is pretty easy to understand. It's about social uplift, yet freedom from discrimination and inequality. Yet freedom to work in any profession or trade that you wanted to work in, something which millions of people in his day didn't have. They were not allowed to go into certain professions or trades. Freedom to marry whoever you want to marry. It's a simple thing, isn't it? To be able to marry who you want to marry. But in his day, that was not possible for millions. And freedom of speech, freedom to vote. Things, again, that we take for granted. So Dr. Ambedkar achieved a lot by improving these freedoms for people in India. It's a lot better now than it was back then. But it's not good enough yet. It's not where it should be. In his early years, these freedoms weren't available to him. So he really felt that very keenly. He had a lucky break, actually, when he was a talented and studious, hard-working student as a young teenager, but he got spotted by the Maharaja of Baroda. We thought, wow, he's a really intelligent guy. I'll fund him to go to university, which he did, and look how it turned out. He had a really great break in that regard. So millions of people around the world today still don't have these rights, unfortunately. Dr. Ambedkar also talked in terms of inner liberty or inner freedom, and he saw it in terms of freedom from and freedom to. So the Buddha, when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree and he gained enlightenment, he experienced complete freedom, total freedom. And he spent a lot of his life, the rest of his life, teaching others how they could become free as well. That's what he did. And what Dr. Ambedkar saw was that this was freedom from greed, hatred, and delusion, which, according to the Buddha, is the kind of hub of it all. That's why we're unhappy. When we're unhappy and suffering, that's at the root of things. Greed, hatred, and delusion in our own minds. But also freedom to develop wisdom, purity, and compassion. Yeah, which are these enlightenment style qualities that can be developed if we want to put the effort in. So that's what he saw, and that's what he taught. There's so much more I could say about liberty, about freedom. That'll have to do for tonight because time is moving on. Some of you might have spotted that these three words, liberty, equality, and fraternity, I've got a familiar ring about them, and that's because of the French Revolution. They're well known, but Dr. Ambedkar refuted that he got them from the French Revolution. If you go to France today, on all public buildings, you'll see liberty, equality, fraternity. But actually, he said he got them from the Buddha. Because, as he pointed out, the French Revolution involved a lot of social upheaval and a lot of violence. And Buddhism is a peaceful religion, and it values social stability. So he didn't want to be associated with the kind of French version of it. He said, no, this comes from the Buddha. So I'm just going to wind up now. Yeah, as I say, there's a lot we can learn from just these four things, these four views, of how Dr. Ambedkar saw the world. And he's very much influenced me and many, many people within the Tree Ratner Buddhist movement. Our teacher, Saddharaja, also, he had a teacher that was from Tibet, that lived in Kalimpong, northern India. And he was a Tibetan abbot called Dharma Rinpoche, very well-known teacher in his particular field, great man. And he died more recently, 1990, more recently than Dr. Ambedkar. And also Saddharaja thought that he was someone that exhibited bodhisattva qualities. And so he also had a motto, his particular motto. And his motto was live united, cherish the doctrine, radiate love. And I think there's quite a tie-up with Dr. Ambedkar's liberty, equality, and fraternity. I think they're quite similar. So maybe it's a case of great bodhisattvas think alike.